There's a gap out there.
We should be able to have conversations.
People aren't able to either express clearly their views or speak the truth, have the difficult conversations.
Without either being labeled or without being accused.
We're going to go beyond the narrative. Welcome everyone to Beyond the Narrative, our second podcast. And I would like to say that we've just done this now, but we actually completed the whole podcast for 90 minutes worth. And guess what, folks? It was all in audio. And as that guy in TikTok in the first episode that Goldie showed when it came to all the reactions of Kamala Harris losing, I'm going to do a cameo performance of it. Ah! Ah! Jesus. All right.
Growing pains. Wait. Calm.
We're soldiers, Goldie. Right. So we're chanting our positive energy, positive vibes. Positive energy, positive vibes. I've just noticed we're matching. All in black. The Goldie and Johnny show. So great.
You got the memo. You got the Johnny. You're embracing your Iranian.
Exactly.
Right. It's like that scene in Clueless. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's from like 20 years ago. At one point, this the popular girl is showing around the new girl for their high school in LA. Of course, it's in Los Angeles, and she's pointing out the different cliques. And so she turns to the Iranians, and she's like, and that's. I think she even calls them the Persian Mafia or something. But she's like, that's the Iranian group. You don't hang out with them unless you wear all black and you have a BMW.
So we decided to show Ty the ropes at Bronson Alcott High School.
And that's the Persian Mafia. You can't hang with them unless you own a BMW.
Welcome to the club.
Absolutely. And, folks, once you go Persian, there's no other version.
It's true.
Right? So you got a double dose. A double dose. Anyhow, folks. It's an important topic. It's a very important topic. We're talking about King Reza Pahlavi leading the revolution and his statement that he made this week.
Great nation of Iran, global and regional developments have presented us with a new opportunity to reclaim and save our beloved Iran. The Islamic Republic lacks both the will and ability to run the country and provide the most basic needs of the people. They have replaced the vision of our great civilization with a great horror. But now, in this critical period, and at this new juncture, we have two paths before us. Either we watch and wait for others to make their desired changes for us, or we become the driving force of change and with national determination and will establish the aspirations of the Iranian nation in our homeland and in the think tanks and corridors of power around the world. My choice, without doubt, is the second option. At your call, I am ready to guide this change and lead the transitional period. My ability stems from your strength, the energy I draw from the continuation of your rightful struggles and protests. I will use towards establishing a national government in Iran and garnering maximum global support to achieve it. Now is the time to decide. Let us move forwards towards a bright and free, prosperous and flourishing future. Long live Iran.
And there's been a lot going on, Goldie. We did our space on Friday, and last night there was also rumours circulating on Twitter about Khamenei being in a coma, about actually Khamenei's dead. In fact, the Assembly of Experts have chosen Mujtaba as the leader. Now, we've heard these rumours for about 10 years about Khamenei being ill. Do you think it's a coincidence after all the stuff we've been hearing about with King Reza Pahlavi, with it trending on Twitter, the media appearances, and that big statement he made? Let's go into that so people can find out more.
I don't think it's a coincidence at all. I mean, like you said, these rumors about his death or going into a coma or having cancer, they've been going on for about 10 years. And I find that every single time that there's big news about King Reza Pahlavi, Iran's king, the Islamic regime always puts out some story or some narrative to try to draw attention away from King Reza Pahlavi and his message towards something else. This most recent rumor with Khamenei is definitely one of them. I'm personally holding off on passing judgment or commenting on it until I have, a legitimate news source or news outlet that reports on this. There may or may not be some truth to whether or not his son has been chosen to take over Mojtaba. That goes back to the factions within the Islamic regime itself and how different factions sort of want to take over. One of the theories about why Raisi, the former president of Iran, was, accidentally killed in a helicopter crash back in the summer relates exactly to this succession of who's going to take over when Khamenei dies. Khabar Margish. Khabar Margish is a Farsi thing that we say. It's, basically the news of his death. So whenever I say Khamenei, I like to add Khabar Margish. But it goes back to this whole possible succession of who's going to take over this brutal Islamofascist dictatorship. And there were some rumors going around that there was one particular faction which wanted Raisi to take over. And so with his accidental death, quote unquote, a lot of people are saying that sort of cleared the way for Mojtaba, Khamenei's son, to essentially take over. Mojtaba is even more brutal and more vicious than his father. And I think part of the reason he's more brutal and more vicious is because he's seeing sort of the end of the Islamic regime. He's basically seeing that there are two generations of Iranians who have been born into the Islamic dictatorship, the millennials, and now you have the Gen Z. And both of these generations have grown up and they are vastly rejecting the Islamic regime. They don't want the Islamic regime. In fact, many of them want to go back to a constitutional monarchy. So for him, I think one of the reasons he's even more vicious is because there's this element of desperation there. And the Islamic regime, it's a brutal dictatorship. They will do anything to stay in power for as long as they can. They have no hesitation in murdering Iranians who fight and want to go back to a free Iran.
He makes some really good points. There is the Game of Thrones being had with Khamenei. He's 85 years old. He is in not good health, regardless of the rumors. It keeps going on. There's something in that mustachiyar, I bet. I don't know how these mullahs, they just go on and on. It's incredible. And the Game of Thrones is between the House of Khamenei and the House of Khomeini. So you've got the grandson of Khomeini, Hassan Khomeini, some of the reformers, your Zarifs and people like that, the former Foreign Secretary of the Islamic Republic. Yeah, reformers, where there's no such thing, right? But that's been the biggest marketing department of the Islamic Republic, been the biggest PR department, have been the brains and effectively kept the show on the road. They've been trying to push him, along with Massoud, the cardiologist, president.
He's a fake cardiologist, by the way. He doesn't even have like a real degree. So
yeah, they love their so-called doctorates. A bit like Ahmadinejad as well with his doctorate. I think he's got a PhD, he says. So there is that Game of Thrones going on, and Raisi was in the mix. He was in the official mix, folks, and he went on a helicopter ride with Ahmed Alaya, the former Foreign Secretary of the Islamic Republic. Because they like lying and telling lies.
Is it main key to? Is the main key to the restoration of security to the region? Islamic Republic of Iran strongly supports security in the region.
And he met his end.
Hello. Hi, how are you? My name is Hossein Amir Abdullahian. My friend here is Ibrahim Raisi. Few days ago, we in a helicopter up in the mountains, jungle, big crash. شهید به انگلیسی چی میشه؟ Martyr. We martyred few days ago with him. He martyred too.
Where some people said, you know, it was an inside job. There was a lot of rumors about who did it. Some people said, oh, it was Israel, etc. And then people said, who would most gain out of it? And some, and this is not proven, but this is just hypothesis there is out there, that it would benefit Mustafa because there would be no other rival as such to clear the way. And they're supposed to not do that in terms of the Islamic Republic. You know, they're supposed to operate a little kind of voting system, you know, the one that Rafsanjani did when he coordinated it to have Khamenei in the first place, even though he was supposed to only be a caretaker for 1 year. And then he didn't get the memo and he decided to stay on. So there is a lot there in terms of that inside battle. But it's also coincidence, Goldie, that in this week, we've had the other story in terms of the New York Times article about Elon Musk, all in the same week. So we've had Elon Musk meeting with the ambassador for Iran, the United Nations ambassador for Iran in the US.
Well, allegedly.
And then we have had this news drop about Coma kind of dying, maybe not, and Mustafa, whilst King Reza Pahlavi delivered one of the most important statements in 45 years about he's ready to lead the revolution.
It's not by coincidence that the exact same day that King Reza Pahlavi put out a statement where he essentially said that at the call of the Iranian people, he is ready to lead the Iranian people and to lead a transitional government as they overthrow the Islamic regime. It's not by coincidence that the very same day, within hours, Farnaz Fasihi, who is basically an Islamic regime agent, she has close ties with NIAC, the National Iranian American Council, which is the Islamic regime's lobby group in the United States. No coincidence that that very same day she came out with this quote-unquote breaking story about Elon Musk meeting with the UN ambassador for the Islamic regime. I didn't bother reading the article because anything Farnaz Fasihi writes is basically garbage. She actually blocked me on X a few years ago because I was calling her out on her nonsense. Without even reading the article, I could just tell that it's a load of garbage because even the caption under the headline says that according to Iranian officials, and I put Iranian in quotation marks because it's not Iranian, they're Islamic regime. So according to the Islamic regime officials, they reported that this meeting was basically them speaking with Elon Musk about how to potentially negotiate or whatever the case might be. It brings a number of questions, brings a number of points to mind. The first one is, why is Farnaz Fasihi the one breaking the news? I mean, we all know that she has close ties with the Islamic regime. So that should be your first hint that there's something wrong with the story. The second hint is that she's basically reporting on what Islamic regime officials say. Everyone knows the Islamic regime lies. Everything that comes out of their mouth is one big lie. For her to write this and try to frame it in a way as if this is an actual fact is very sneaky. And her goal with putting that story out there was to turn the narrative away from King Reza Pahlavi and his historic speech towards this other story and try to confuse people or draw attention away. And, I think for about 24 hours, it really did. It really did draw a lot of people's attention away. And so I put out a tweet in Farsi and I said, isn't it curious how within hours of the king putting out the statement, you have the Islamic regime pushing the story. And then now, yesterday, they're trying to continue the story because the story didn't stick. I mean, sure, it was for about 24 hours, but then people sort of figured it out and they went back to focusing on King Reza Pahlavi. So what they did to try and continue the story is yesterday they came out with some statements. I think it was yesterday or the day before. They came out with some statements essentially saying, oh, no, the meeting never happened. So now you have two different factions within the Islamic regime who are saying the exact opposite thing. And that should tell you, that should be a big tell that this is the Islamic regime's way of trying to turn attention away from the king towards them or towards anything else, right? Like, this is how the Islamic regime has been operating for 45 years. So to me, what happened this past week is no different. And I think moving forward, as things continue to escalate inside of Iran between Iranians and the Islamic regime, and as King Reza Pahlavi continues to become even more outspoken and more prominent in the media, we're going to start to see more of these sort of false flag stories or whatever the case may be come out to try and shift the narrative from what it should be focused on, which is the king of Iran, to all these other things which really have no relevance or bearing on the revolution.
It's so true. And I've even seen, after the second time of doing this podcast on Twitter, false reports of protests erupting in Iran being played out there, of taking down like posters of Khamenei, etc., which is false. There wasn't any credible reports to it. It's all psyops, folks. They have a big cyber army, about 50,000, and they're trying to play some mind games, etc.
In fact, Johnny, it's their fourth largest ministry. They have a ministry of cyber warfare. It's their fourth largest ministry, and the Islamic regime spends upwards of $1 billion on it. And a lot of people, when they think about the Islamic regime, they think of like the actual physical aspect of it, like the terrorism and the proxies. But what they don't really think about is the information war side of it, the psyops, like you said. They literally dedicate at least $1 billion a year to psyops, and that includes bots. It includes hiring people around the world. It includes funding the Quds News Network, giving money to Al Jazeera, right? Like Press TV, all of these outlets that they have, which are basically propaganda pieces for the Islamic regime to promote their narrative. And they also have a very heavy presence on X and on various social media accounts as well.
Yeah, so many good points, and intellectuals spouting nonsense at times when they're purporting the same lines as they want. And it's a real thing. And the point he made about Mustafa, people think sometimes, maybe there'll be a progressive figure of some description, people who don't know that or are quite on the outside in terms of understanding this regime. And there is no such thing for one. And secondly, MBS and Mustafa, there is no infinite comparison on this planet. And I'll tell you why. Like you said, he's actually worse by all accounts than even Ali Khamenei. And he was the guy that played a major role for 2009 and the Green Movement, that suppression. The scenes that people saw on CNN, not my favorite TV network, of Nether Sultani with the blood coming out. And apparently he was quite heavily involved in that process. So it's not like this MBS figure of in his 30s, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. One, he's in his late 50s, and two, he's a very dark figure in many ways.
I think with King Reza Pahlavi's most recent statement, I think the Islamic regime is very scared, because the statement that he made is historic. He's made a number of historic statements in the last few months, but the one from a few days ago is even more historic, because for the first time, he explicitly states that, and I'm going to read this. He explicitly states that at your call, I'm ready to guide this change and lead the transitional period. My ability stems from your strength. The energy I draw from the continuation of your rightful struggles and protests, I will use toward establishing a national government in Iran and garnering maximum global support to achieve it. Now is the time to decide. Let us move towards a bright and free, prosperous, and flourishing future. Long live Iran. I get chills just
It's
reading
such a
that.
powerful statement. Yeah, it's such a powerful statement. And he went on a podcast with Patrick Bet-David. He actually did two with him. And Patrick Bet-David at one point said, "Do you want the job? Do you want the job?" And with King Reza Pahlavi, at times, there was people understood in terms of some of his answer back where he didn't want to be so arrogant or to put himself in a position of say, "Yeah, I want the job, I want this, I want that." He's not that type of figure. He's a unity figure. He's someone who's there, who's going to heal the nation and take it back in terms of the real Iran. But he was answering the question, saying, "Look, I will do my best to play my part in helping my fellow countrymen to get Iran back, and whatever I can do, I will be there to do it."
Do you see it as you want the job, you want to be the person to help bring democracy to Iran, or help people be free, or is it more like, if the people want me, I will. It is my duty, it is my responsibility. I'll do the job. How do you see it?
Well, honestly, Patrick, and I'm not giving you BS, this is really what I wholeheartedly believe. I think that a lot of people trust me in the sense that I could help them with the transition. That doesn't mean that I represent the outcome. That means that I can help the transition. On this note, I have many people who are monarchists who support me. I have many people who are Republicans and support me. And I've said time and again that I'm not running for any office because, and I tell you why. Because in terms of the job, let's define what a job is. I will tell you what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. I start by telling you that I might have been destined at some point to have been the future king as a result of having been a crown prince. And of course, then everything goes south and the regime changes and a new reality sets in. So I'm now a young man in exile. And of course, I'm engaged with the opposition activity of Iranians against the regime from the get-go, from the early 80s. And now, as I said, 43 years and counting, I'm still doing the same. Because I believe that this regime at some point will not last. Hopefully it will be in my lifetime. And in that sense, we as Iranians have an opportunity to design our future. But what do I bring to the table? What do I really bring to the table? I really think that what I can bring, which is most helpful to the nation, are all these elements that strengthen society, that educates and prepares society, that gives citizens the understanding of how to fight for their rights.
And Patrick Bet-David tried to press him again on it, but he didn't go any further than that. And a lot of Iranians understood the answer in terms of the context of everything going on. Because let's face it, Goldie, at times the community has been a bit historically with what's gone on with the Islamic Republic, the 1979 revolution. Things like unity, togetherness and stuff has been a little bit difficult. And we got quite a bit of that after Mahsa Amini and the Woman Life Freedom that I've never seen before, like on social media. But now that people understood his response back to Patrick Bet-David, I think secretly they were hoping, I wish he could just be a bit more forthright in terms of just coming out with it. What most Iranians want to hear. And then he did this week, saying, I'm ready to play my role, to lead this revolution in terms of the falling of the Islamic Republic. And that's what this has been crying for, because to have a successful revolution, you need a leader. And one of the reasons Mahsa Amini and the Woman Life Freedom Revolution stalled and didn't quite work was because although at first it played to their strengths in terms of on the ground there wasn't leaders, etc., so it was a bit decentralized. If you look at history, which is a great teacher, that any successful revolution of a tyranny or a government regime like this, it requires that leadership head. And now we've got it.
No revolution has ever been successful without a leader. It's never happened in history. And initially, woman life freedom was the sounding call, 100% for the uprising. But what happens, as so often happens, is the phrase "woman life freedom" (Zan Zindagi Azadi) was co-opted by the bad actors. It was co-opted by the far left. It was co-opted by the Marxists and the communists, like the Mujahideen. It was also co-opted by the Islamic regime itself. They were trying to say like woman life freedom is something that we support as well. And the reason it was co-opted is because you have these bad actors. You have the Islamic regime, and then you also have the far radical left. And let me tell you something. The only group that Iranians hate more than the Islamic regime is the far radical left, is the communists. Because when you look at the revolution in 1979, King Reza Pahlavi explains this perfectly in an interview that he had with PragerU a couple weeks ago. He talks about this alliance between the red, which is the communists, and the black, which is the Islamists.
Well, there were two major groups that were opposed to the way Iran was, the direction it had taken. Everything that I explained regarding women's rights and things that were happening, the clergy didn't look at that very favorably. And Khomeini, in fact, started everything when my father instigated the white revolution at the time that brought in all these elements. He was the first one to start speaking against it and build that sort of rejection by the Islamists or the fundamentalists there. On the other hand, you had the Marxist forces who didn't like this rapprochement with the West in general, and in their sort of anti-imperialist, anti-Western rhetoric, sort of partnered with the Islamists. And that was the root cause that brought about that moment where there were forces at play that took it to that level of leading to this revolution. I think that now the children of that generation who in 1957, Iranian calendar, 57, which is 1979, were part of it, turned back to their parents and said, what the hell were you thinking? What was lacking? The maximum we could argue might be that maybe in terms of political liberalization, we were not quite there yet, but we were going in that direction. They were saying, well, a lot of reforms could have happened and we could have avoided having a revolution. But instead, we opted to bring in some cleric that we believed would be just a very benign, sort of symbolic leader retiring in the city of Qom and allowing for all these promised liberties. And instead, we ended up with what we have. And by the time we realized what it was too late.
And what united them is their mutual shared hatred for anything relating to the West and their desire for anti-imperialism. I mean, that's where it ends basically, because they united and the communists helped the Islamic regime overthrow the Shah and take over the country. And as soon as that happened, then you had the Islamists go out and basically kill not just the communists and the Marxists, but pretty much anyone on the left. They went out and they killed, alongside many, many others. But so that unity, that army of the red and the black is such a dangerous union, such a dangerous alliance. And that's why Iranians hate communists even more than they hate Islamists, if that's even possible. But so, they co-opted that phrase and they used that to sort of dilute the message. And that's one of the reasons why Iranians shifted from woman life freedom to King Reza Pahlavi. Hashtag King Reza Pahlavi. In Farsi, it's Javid Shah, which means long live the king. And the reason they switched to that hashtag is because that's something that can't be co-opted anymore. You can't have the Islamists say, oh yes, King Reza Pahlavi. You can't have the communists say, oh yeah, King Reza Pahlavi, right? So that's the one hashtag, that's the one phrase, that's the one saying that no one can take away from Iranians. And that's why I think we're now seeing King Reza Pahlavi come out and issue this very important statement, because he now knows that he has the support and the confidence of over 80% of Iranians inside of Iran and around the world who will back him up. He even said a few weeks ago when he was accepting the award for the Richard Nixon Foundation Architect of Peace, he said that in the past, people have questioned whether or not he'll be successful in freeing Iran because he doesn't have an army. But now he does have an army, and his army is the Iranian people.
Often those fighting for Iran's liberation did so alone and against the pressures of the global media and establishment. Even today, those pressures continue. But today things have changed because those ordinary people who honor my father's name do so not just out of nostalgia. Those ordinary people, millions of them across my country, are extraordinarily brave. Because they are not just hoping for the better future my father believed they deserved. They are fighting for it. I was often told that I would not get far in my campaign for my country because I did not have the apparatus of state, certainly not the proper funding, and no army. But now, I have such an army, my extraordinary brave compatriots.
And it's so powerful. And, you know, there's two types of war when it comes to these spins, when it's revolution. There's soft war and there's the hard war, and the soft power and the hard power. And the soft power of social media, it has been huge, because if you think about Masa Amini and that hashtag, it was supposed to have one tweet for every single Iranian, and which is about 90 million inside Iran, and it hit over 125 million or something. It's a record-breaking hashtag. And the problem is exactly what you said. It got weaponized, it got infiltrated. But for those that are unaware of the recent history of inside Iran, is that in 1979, the Islamic Republic came in, and it was the axis of the black and red. If you look at videos, you'll find it on YouTube, the channel that we're on, where Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, talks about this axis and actually warns about this axis and the dangers of it.
How do you think future generations of Iranians will view your 37 years?
The truth and the reality of history could not be kept always in the shadows. That is impossible. Truth will come out. In any case, sooner or later.
And at that point, in 50 years' time, how will future Iranians judge you?
50 years, I hope it will be sooner than that.
Well, whenever I was saying, how will your people, after a period, judge you?
Well, if they read history, they will see what it was before my father, what it was when I took over, and what it was when I left.
And you see it even now, like people on the radical left talking about Hezbollah are part of an important part, intellectuals, they describe themselves, of the progressive left. So that combination is toxic, and it led to that 1979 Islamic Republic to come about. And because they were the brains as well behind that revolution. So you had figures like Yazdi, which was a prominent figure within that revolution. You had Bani Sad, which I think was the first president of the Islamic Republic. He then left. He dressed up in a veil and left the country because they fell out, as they did with all of them. You then had Gubzar there. I think I've got his pronunciation wrong, but he was the foreign secretary at the time of. He was the original Zarif, folks, of his time. He was a bit more suave than Zarif. He was taller. He had better fashion sense. He was doing the TV networks, and basically he was the face of the revolution to calm Western powers, to say, we're all right, etc., and all of that. And they ended up executing him. So this is what's happened with that toxic mix, and you know what they say about toxic relationships, and there's one in spades. But an important question like we had on our show, which we do every Friday on X at 8:30 p.m. UK time, is we had on our space a contributor on the panel called Brian, and he asked an important question, and it's really important. And the spaces that we operate aren't echo chambers because people don't want to hear echo chambers, but they also want to. You also want to hear what other people outside of the community. So I'm half British, half Iranian, and you're fully Iranian, but Canadian as well. And he asked, "What about this statement is different?" That was one part of his question, and the second aspect was, "What if, God forbid, King Reza Pahlavi, 64. 64 is the new 54, folks. Like 40 is the new 20. Let's
I
keep
hope
it
it's the new
going.
20
Let's
because
keep
I'm turning
fighting.
40 in 6 months.
Well, you don't look a day over 30. But
Thank
when you
you.
join the 40s club, like me, you're hanging on. You're hanging on.
Okay, well,
But
40 is the new 20, so, you're only 20, 25, 26. There you go.
Exactly. And my response back to him, and we'll play the clip, was you had Donald Trump at 78. You had Bibi, I think he's 73 or something. He's in his 70s. So they're getting older. And the baby, in terms of age, is King Reza Pahlavi, who's 64 only. So if we want to play that clip and see that interaction, that'd be great for the audience.
I was wondering, to what extent was this speech different from earlier speeches and announcements by King Reza Pahlavi? Correct me if I'm wrong, but he has come out before that he was willing to serve, that he would be willing to play a role in a post-Islamic regime Iran. So to what extent is this different?
So in the past, what King Pahlavi has usually said is he's willing to be a voice. He's willing to share the concerns of the Iranian people. He's willing to play a role. What's different now is that he has actually come out and explicitly said, "At your call, I am ready to guide this change and lead the transitional period." And that is key.
At your call, I am ready to guide this change and lead the transitional period.
That is what everyone was waiting for. And what he was waiting for was to see how much support he has from Iranian people so that he can make that statement with authority and with legitimacy. Given the efforts of everyone, not just in the diaspora, but inside of Iran through videos and pictures and chanting in the streets, calling his name. Graffiti on walls, things like that. He is seeing that he has a lot of support. And I pinned something up. This was a survey that was done by an independent group in Europe about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, this survey found out that he had at least 80% of support from Iranians inside of Iran. I can guarantee you that number has gone up. If anything, it's probably close to 85 or 90% support right now. That's why he now has the confidence to say that he's willing to lead the transitional government, willing to lead the revolution, and that is huge. So Iranians finally have a leader who can lead them in a revolution to overthrow the Islamic regime and, as he says, throw them into the ash heap of history once and for all. I forgot to also mention that it's not just the graffiti and the chanting and the surveys, it's also the hashtag King Reza Pahlavi. What we just spoke about. That hashtag is so important because, again, no other group can co-opt that hashtag. So the fact that the hashtag King Reza Pahlavi is constantly trending, not just in Iran, but around the world, that also, I think, gave King Reza Pahlavi the confidence to go out there and say, "I will lead the Iranian people," right? There have been so many attacking him, and not just the Islamic regime. People on the left constantly
Yeah.
attack him. Always. Now, he knows that he can go out there and say with 100% confidence, I will be the leader at your call. When he says at your call, I think he's referring specifically to the hashtag King Reza Pahlavi. That is the call.
Yeah, such powerful, important points. Because a lot of these hashtags, by the way, folks, they designate inside Iran. Right? The hashtags are coming from inside Iran. The Pahlavi name is the main brand inside Iran. Everybody knows the Pahlavi name. Right? Everyone inside Iran knows Pahlavi, right? Through what Mohammad Reza Pahlavi did, his father. They're the face of modern Iran. They created modern Iran.
When you look at the legacy, the way people now look upon what my grandfather and my father did as the architect of modern Iran. In fact, they call my family the Iran building family. Demonstrates that the view was we can bring Iran from the underdeveloped country where most people were uneducated, illiterate, to a country that in the 70s was thriving, had a strong economy. Iranians were educating themselves, coming back to Iran to bring in whatever was necessary in terms of development and infrastructure. Iran really began to flourish, especially post-Second World War, where we were able to start producing our oil and selling it at a higher price. We created enough revenue so you can start really spending it on copious projects of modernization, development, factories, dams, roads, schools, everything that was needed. At the time of my grandfather, Iran's income per capita was around $400. Towards the end, it was over $2,800, and it was sort of like really increasing. But I think the most important element, especially now in contrast to where Iran was and what it is under this regime, is how much was done, especially for the women in Iran. Mm-hmm. And that would really happen at the time of my father. Of course, my grandfather was the first one to say that people should be free to wear the veil or not, the hijab issue. He led by example by having his own daughters go out in public without wearing any veil. And that was one way to liberate women from having to be castigated into, that. And the symbolism of it is so obvious because even when Mahsa happened a year ago, you see how much that is a symbol of where we were. Women were integrated in all form or shape into not just members of society, but actual participants in governance. Iranian women achieved suffrage 4 years before the women in Switzerland did. There were family laws to protect families and women's rights. They were given opportunities to become ministers, judges, even serve in the armed forces. It was a completely different situation. As opposed to what this regime has done and turned them into second-class citizens.
Reza Shah the Great basically modernized Iran. We call Reza Shah the father of modern-day Iran.
And he was on his knees before he did. That is a powerful thing. And secondly, with all of these things, you grow into things. You grow into roles as well, right? For anything in life, I remember what someone once told me, I asked, what actually builds true self-confidence? And the person said, you know what? And this person was hugely successful, a billionaire, etc. And he said, I'll tell you what, Johnny, two things build true self-confidence. Number one, experience. Number two, achieving things. So for 45 years, he has the experience.
So I'm now a young man in exile. And of course, I'm engaged with the opposition activity of Iranians against the regime from the get-go, from the early 80s. And now, as I said, 43 years and counting, I'm still doing the same. Because I believe that this regime at some point will not last. Hopefully, it will be in my lifetime. And in that sense, we as Iranians have an opportunity to design our future. But what do I bring to the table? What do I really bring to the table? First of all, I think that it was a blessing in disguise for me in terms of the experiences that I have acquired in all these years that I would never have acquired if I had just been in Iran and just went to a transition. I had the opportunity of traveling the four corners of the world. I had the opportunity to see different cultures and civilizations. I had the opportunity to talk to average people, cab drivers, merchants, students, officers, all type of people, understanding how citizens in respective countries look towards their leaders or governments, or what are their peeves, what are their frustrations, what are their demands. That's a wealth of information.
And two, in terms of achieving things, in terms of his consistent activism, in terms of his consistency in being the face of Iran, the real Iran, the true Iran.
For 45 years, Iran has been taken captive, and my compatriots have been held hostage. They have been held hostage not by American sanctions or Western policies, but by radical Islamism. You do not have to fight the war against this poisonous and murderous ideology on your own, but you must be aware that it is waging war against you. I do have good news, because there is an army rising up against this poisonous ideology. That army is the Iranian people, the united Iranian people. Today, I come to you with a message from that rising army, that nation under captivity, those citizens taken hostage. The Islamic Republic may have taken hold of Iran, but it has never taken hold of Iranians' love of country. Today, Iran, inspired by our ancient history and our great civilization, is in the throes of a national revival, a national reawakening, a national renaissance. Iranians are proud, strong people with a proud, storied history, and are not willing to lose it to this unholy alliance. As my compatriots on the streets or at the tomb of Cyrus the Great chant, we will fight, we will die, we will reclaim Iran.
But with any of these things, you also you're a human being. You have to see the people to say, we want you back. We want Iran back. And when he hears in the protests, even in Masa Amini, the only person being called was King Reza Pahlavi, the Pahlavi name, etc. Nobody else, only him. And even that survey that you said, I think it's from the Ghanem Institute or something like that, from Netherlands. And the authors of that are on the far left. They're not pro-Pahlavi, so even they are reporting it. So this is not some kind of like bias in terms of speaking about these things. This is just objective facts.
That's a really good point there, Johnny. I'm glad you pointed that out, because they were far left, the authors of that survey. And I guarantee you, one of the reasons they probably put the survey out there is they wanted the opposite effect, right? Like they probably wanted to show that King Reza Pahlavi does not have any support. Meanwhile, the numbers come back at least 80%. That's not an insignificant amount. People become presidents with sometimes less than 30% of the vote of a country. I mean, how many presidents do you know who have 80% support? Like 80% is huge. It's huge.
It's unheard of.
Unheard of. Even the most popular politicians in Canada, maybe 70%. And that's very, very few. When I got elected both times, I was very proud of the numbers that I had, which is still really high and very rare. I mean, the first time I had 51, almost 52% support. And the second time I had 49, almost 50% support. And those are considered really, really high. So the fact that 2 years ago, he had 80% support, and that's coming from a leftist group that doesn't like Reza Pahlavi, doesn't like King Reza Pahlavi, that says a lot. If anything, it adds more legitimacy to the support that he has.
100%. Because they always say one man's statistics is another person's false kind of news, and statistics as you want to make it, blah, 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 surveys and polls. But the reality is when the actual authors of it are not pro-Pahlavi, they're actually quite the opposite, and they're far left. Yeah. That speaks a lot of volumes. Yeah. But it goes on to Brian's second part of his question, which we'll play now, where he does talk about what we just spoke about in terms of what if there's something around King Reza Pahlavi of a certain age. He was alluding to those points, which I think from our side of the perspective, well, anyone talks about it. We've heard talk about it even in the US elections, didn't we, in terms of age or whatever and stuff like that. People think about these things. Let's play that and see what he was saying.
Well, here's a scenario that probably we do not want to think about, but anytime I'm here in the spaces, I do see how important he is for the Iranian people. But he's not the youngest person, and yeah, God forbid, you hope he will live a very long life. But if it happens to be that he would not live long enough to see the end of the Islamic regime, could the Iranian people rally around one of his children, or is it someone else? I do understand.
Yeah, no, I'll answer that question really quickly. I mean, obviously, that's not something that we want to think about. Our king, he's very, he's still very young. He's healthy. However, it is a monarchy, and we do have a crown princess, Princess Noor Pahlavi, his eldest daughter, and she is currently starting to play a more active role in politics, and she's also being promoted and supported by the Iranian people. So, in a God forbid worst case scenario, the monarchy line would still continue because we do have our crown princess as well. But our king is young, he's strong, he's healthy, he's fit. So it's not really something that we're thinking about at this time, because we know that with re-election of President Trump, and also with now Netanyahu and now King Reza Pahlavi, we have, in terms of politics, we have the perfect trifecta here of three very strong leaders. And so I really think the stars are aligning, and I have a feeling that the downfall of the regime is going to be much sooner rather than later. I kind of.
You were triggered. You were triggered.
I mean, it's an
hard,
important question, I guess, but no one really wants to think about that, especially when King Reza Pahlavi is so young and fit. It's not something anyone wants to think about.
Yeah, he was doing it from a place of just inquisitive kind of asking, but you can't help it because, folks, when you have skin in the game in terms of that you come from a certain country or a society or whatever, there's an affinity there, there's feelings there, there's emotions there, and it's normal. Without feelings, it means you don't care. It means you have no emotions. But I went on to answer him as well. If we just play that bit.
He is very, very important to the revolution because of the backstory, because he was there at the time of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. He served in Iran. You see a picture of King Reza Pahlavi in his military uniform. He was getting training here in the US when the revolution was happening as well. So he is very, very important indeed. But 65 is the new 45. Our leaders are getting older, from Bibi to Donald Trump, and it's important to have that kind of youthful outlook and virility. It's right in terms of the monarchy, and it's an institution, etc., and all of that. But he is very important because of the consistency.
Just one further point. People might not know this, but the monarchy in Iran was the oldest monarchy in history. And the British monarchy was second. Now the British monarchy is the oldest, but the Iranian monarchy was the oldest, going back Cyrus the Great, etc., thousands of years. So the institution goes on, absolutely. And my take on it is he has the unique qualities of being there at the time of his dad, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. And that he served in the Air Force in Iran. He knows what it's like in living in Iran, etc. He's had 45 years of dealing with this regime. He understands how to deal with world leaders. He's got that kind of political experience. He's getting that buy-in, etc. He is so important. And I think part of their strategy, the Islamic Republic, is that I think they were trying to play it out, because they've always tried to play out, kick the can down the road, keep the show on the road, kick the can in the grass, in the long grass, etc. Keep going, 1 more year, 5 more years, 10 more years, and wait to either the King Reza Pahlavi is too old, or God forbid something happens, and in that way they say, "All right, it's game over now. There's no one else that can have any type of legitimacy like he has, even his daughter, etc." Because they would come out with the narrative of, well, she's never been born in Iran, she's never lived in Iran, so how can she have any relatability or provenance towards Iran?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the Islamic regime coming out with that narrative and trying to sort of maybe play it out and wait it out with King Reza Pahlavi. But I don't think that narrative is going to work for a number of reasons. Iranians as a culture and as a civilization, women's rights and women's equality has always been so important. When you go back 3,000 years to the time of Cyrus the Great, he's the founder of human rights, the Cyrus cylinder. And within the Persian Empire, women had equal rights to men. Women served in the military. They served important political positions. They owned land. They owned businesses. They hired people. So women, women even got maternity pay. In fact, in ancient Persia, women who got pregnant and took maternity leave, they actually got paid a salary that was higher than when they were working, because the society recognized what the added burden, I guess, of having and raising children is. So and they viewed the family is so important that they provided women with an extra salary if she was pregnant. So that's that. And then women's rights in ancient Persia was so important, and it kept on becoming more enshrined, and they kept on getting more rights until the mid 650s, when the Muslim conquest of Persia, the Arabs came and they brought in Islam. They turned it into a caliphate, and at that point, that's when women's rights in Iran, basically they became second-class citizens, and of course we all know how that goes. But when you look at the history of Iran, women have always played a very important role. And so that's a really big element of our culture and our identity as Iranians, just like the monarchy is part of our identity and culture. So it's no surprise that when Reza Shah the Great became the king, when he began to modernize Iran, women's rights played a very important role in that, and that torch was passed along to his son Mohammad Reza Shah, and also his wife, Shahrbanu Farah Pahlavi. And both of them were basically the architects of what we call the White Revolution, which really not only modernized Iran, but brought women's rights to the forefront. I mean, women had the right to vote in Iran before women in Switzerland. King Reza Pahlavi, in one of his interviews with PragerU, he actually speaks about how the White Revolution was one of the factors that irked the Islamists. And it was one of the factors that really motivated the Islamists and Khomeini to fight back, because they viewed this modernization as, Western corruption, and they wanted to return Iran to basically being a caliphate, because they had this anti-West narrative going on. And I'll play that clip. I'll play that clip for you right now, because it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see this, and that's the same narrative we're seeing today as well with the Islamists in Iran, right? Like why they're fighting so much against Iranians trying to overthrow the regime.
Well, there were two major groups that were opposed to the way Iran was, the direction it had taken. Everything that I explained regarding women's rights and things that were happening, the clergy didn't look at that very favorably. And Khomeini, in fact, started everything when my father instigated the White Revolution at the time that brought in all these elements. He was the first one to start speaking against it and build that sort of rejection by the Islamists or the fundamentalists there. On the other hand, you had the Marxist forces who didn't like this rapprochement with the West in general, and in their sort of anti-imperialist, anti-Western rhetoric, sort of partnered with the Islamists. And that was the root cause that brought about that moment where there were forces at play that took it to that level of leading to this revolution.
Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, I think the BBC or someone interviewed him and asked him and said, so what happens if the mullahs go on the rise inside Iran? What would happen to Iran? And he said, well, if that happened, we would go back 1,400 years. And it was proven to be correct.
What do you miss most about it?
What I miss, what makes me really proud is that what could have been this year, surely by the end of 82, something quite viable. And what are we now? What is it serving? Religion, democracy, human rights, the rule of the people.
And in terms of women's rights, so many aspects, from custody rights, in terms of women having more rights, to being able to file for divorce, to more utilization
elected
of
officials.
courts.
We had women parliamentarians in
Yeah.
1979.
Yeah, totally. And even one of our great queens, a long time ago, Queen Esther. There's a long history of Iranian women are lionesses. They're powerful, they're strong, they always have been throughout history. Because sometimes there is the argument, like in politics, for example, we've had the US elections and Trump versus Harris, and we know how that went, folks. If you saw our first episode, you also know what the reactions were to Trump winning. And it was off the charts. But the second aspect is that some people argued, and I think they were mostly on the left, but they did say, the US is just not ready to have a female president. And this is the bastion of the leader of the free world, bastion of democracy, etc. And I think we've chatted about this in terms of that, what people say. Well, what's your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's a bunch of nonsense. I don't think it's that the United States isn't ready to have a female leader. I think the two women who were presented, I mean, they were terrible candidates. They ran on this narrative of identity politics, vote for me because I'm a woman, which is a terrible platform. And I'm saying that as someone who's ran 2 successful elections in a predominantly rural conservative area. And I had no issues getting elected because I didn't focus on, my gender. I didn't focus on vote for me because I'm a woman. I focused on what I can bring to the table and policies. And that's what people want. They want substance. So it's not that America is not ready. It's just America just didn't want to vote for someone that they consider to be an unqualified candidate. And it has nothing to do with whether or not she's a woman.
Yeah, absolutely correct. The options were terrible in that sense for a lot of people. And I say that because some people might argue, if the US is not ready to have a female president, how can Iran have? And we've explained that quite clearly in terms of the history of powerful women, etc. But let's move the conversation on. So in that space that we did, we then had 2 interesting characters, inverted quotes, you'll see for yourselves, one of which comes on to the space and starts talking about, I just don't want Iran to be like Libya. Shall we play that one?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
The problem with change of regime like Iran, it's not going to happen unless you work with the CIA or the Mossad or somebody from outside you're going to be beholden to them. Okay? So when you're going to be beholden to them, obviously, if the regime happens to change, they're going to strip the nation of its weapons because they don't want to disrupt Israel, the nearby country that has a massive amount of nuclear weapons, and they're going to strip it out of everything. And guess what? are you really serving your people by making your country to be weak? Let's assume that Israel will never attack them, but I guess there could be a threat from some other place. Okay? So, in my opinion, I think change cannot happen the way we think it might happen. It'll be violent, it will change. Libya is a small country, and we had at least 70,000 people that died in 2011. Can you imagine what would happen in Iran if there's a violent revolution? And actually, I'm going to conclude by saying everybody in this space should actually be very watchful of Zionist operators that speak the Persian language, that understand the language, and that actually are stealth. Their interest and loyalty is not to Iran and basically to Israel. And that's the problem that America faces now. Everybody that comes into the administration is bought by AIPAC. And guess what? Their loyalty is not to the United States national security interest. Their loyalty is to the state of Israel that so far has actually destroyed our credibility around the world and messed us up. And thank you for the opportunity. And I'm
All
just
right,
going
you
to stop
finished?
here.
Okay.
Before I hear your response, I just want to know how many times have you been called a Zionist, Johnny?
I haven't actually.
Really?
What? Once in the space.
I get called a Zionist all the time. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's just interesting.
Maybe it's the British accent. For some reason,
Maybe I don't
they
know.
associate
But I get called a Zionist all the time. And it's really interesting how he brought it up as like sort of like an
Yes.
insult or like a that's a big
Yeah,
tell.
the
That's
telltale
how you can
signs of what he's saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's play the reply and then we'll give our analysis.
So between the conflict between Israel and Hamas, do you see Hamas as a terrorist organization?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, they're
Not at all.
mandated by the United States. No, I'm going to tell you, mandated by the United Nations as a legitimate resistance group for their
their
nation.
That's where you know 2/3 of nothing. Because 1,200 people slaughtered by a terrorist organization acting in a terrorist way called Hamas.
That's not fair.
Right?
Let me tell you, you're absolutely right. It was actually very sad.
Right.
I opposed it. It
So
wasn't
when
actually
you talk about,
I always like it when you ask that question because the answer to that question always lets us know whether someone supports the Islamic Republic.
100%. Yeah.
hold on, I'm talking now, right? When you talk about how you're trying to raise the kind of spectrum of, be careful what you wish for, Iranians and Iran. You don't want to end up like what we had in Libya. You're going to end up like there's going to be like a bloodbath and there's going to be all this happening, that happening. You do know the history of Iran, don't you?
Yeah, no, I do. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you something.
You do know that.
No, let me tell you something about Iranians.
Yeah.
I have had a lot of experience with Iranians.
Well, obviously not the right ones.
Iranians work for me.
Yeah.
Work side by side. The Iranians are the most awesome human beings.
Okay, yeah.
Really awesome people.
So, do you know the history of Iran?
As much as someone who's not Iranian, I do to some extent.
So,
as a matter of fact,
when you talk about a bloodbath, where an Iranian's been so incapable, and that we're going to end up we're going to just end up killing each other, screwing each other over, blah blah blah. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be awful. It's going to be like what we had in Libya, and you're so concerned. Do you know that throughout history, Iranians have survived conquest after conquest? Do you know that when it came to the Genghis Khan and the Mongols, you know how many Iranians they killed? 90% of Persians, of the population, right, still survived and went on to thrive. Do you know what happened after Alexander and the Macedonians? Still survived and went on to thrive. I'm not finished yet. Okay. I will come to you. Do you know what happened after the Arab conquest? Still survived and went on to thrive. Because Iran's identity, Iran's culture is so strong that nothing and no one is going to get in the way. And Iran is a proper country, a real country,
a country that's been around for so long and has overcome so much, and it will overcome the Khomeini regime now being looked after by Khamenei for the last 37 years, etc. Because history shows you that. Precedent of history shows you that. So when you put the kind of fear-mongering, I'm going to ask a question, I'm just making the point. This is what people who sip for the Islamic Republic do. They want to put doubts in others and say, look, you know, you've got to see it from this angle. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be mayhem. Just, you know, let's just reform these guys. Let's stick with the reformers, etc. It's the people that's bought this regime time. We don't fall for it. It's a load of bullshit. History shows it. Iranians will do just fine because most of Iran, the vast majority of Iran, you know who they're behind? They're behind Iran and Iranians. They're not behind occupations like the Islamic Republic. We don't want to be occupied. We've had enough for 45 years, so we'll be just fine. Thank you very much. Who else wants to speak?
Do you mind if I
Johnny,
respond
don't
really
forget
quickly to your points?
he
Do you
thinks
mind just for 30
Johnny,
seconds?
he thinks he's
Just 30 seconds.
qualified because he has Iranians speaking for him. Can you
Just 30
not
seconds.
hear me? Don't talk over me when I'm speaking. Don't talk over me when I'm
I'm sorry.
speaking. Mute your mic, please. Mute your mic, please. Thank you. No, I just find it interesting that you know, he says, "Oh, Iranians work for me," as if that's like some sort of qualification. Your qualifications mean nothing, especially if you're comparing Iran to Libya, and you know, pushing that propaganda. So, I mean, Iranians work for me is like the equivalent of saying, "Oh, I know what's happening in Iran because I have an Iranian friend." Like that, I don't know, like that makes it worse in
No,
my
Goldie,
opinion. That
that's not what
actually
I
makes
meant at
it
all.
worse,
That's
and
not
it
what I
gives
meant,
you
Goldie. That's not what I meant. I'm just.
then why would you bring up what? But then why would you bring up the fact that Iranians work for you? Because
No,
Johnny literally asked you, "What
I'm
do you
sorry.
know
I'm
about it?"
sorry.
And you're
I'm
like, "I
sorry
have
if I came
Iranians
across.
working for
I'm
me."
sorry if I came across
What
that
does that
way.
even
No,
mean?
I'm sorry if I came across that way. What I meant to say is, I worked side by side with Iranians. I had many Iranians that held great positions.
But that's still
Okay. Now all I'm trying to say is that right.
that still doesn't give you
No,
okay.
but Goldie,
That's like me
no,
saying I can no. That's like me saying that I have knowledge and experience to speak about Japan because I have a Japanese friend or I've worked with a Japanese person. Like the logic is insane. The logic is insane. I don't know, Johnny, if you want to hear from him
Yeah,
or
or
not. I'm
basically,
done speaking with him. I made my point.
yeah, or
You know what, Johnny? I can now say that I know everything about the United Kingdom because I co-host the space with you. So now I'm an expert on the United Kingdom. Just want to put it
or
out there. I'm gonna add it to my X profile. Expert on UK because I have a British friend.
or a racist saying, "No, I'm not a racist. I've got a black friend." You know, this is ridiculous. And the Iranians you're
That's
hanging around
exactly
Come on,
with.
with
guys.
are
You didn't understand what I meant. You didn't
probably from
understand
the
what I
Islamic
meant.
Republic.
Come
Are
on, guys.
probably
You
from the
didn't
Islamic
understand what I
Republic.
meant. You're changing what I just said. Please
I
don't do
didn't
that
change
to me.
anything what you said.
No.
You can look
All
back on the
all
recording.
I said. Let me finish the second sentence. Okay.
Yeah,
Let
go
me
on.
finish the second sentence. Okay.
Johnny, this is gonna be a
No,
good clip for our next
Yeah.
podcast. We can talk about how people who have
Goldie,
Iranian friends
Goldie,
think
please,
they're
please give
experts
me a
on
chance.
Iran.
I would actually beg you to give me a chance for 30 seconds, okay? All I'm trying
Yeah,
to
go on.
say that the Iranian people are awesome people. It doesn't matter who they are and what they are. Why? Because I've had good experience with them. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying they're my source of knowledge, okay? I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that. And I'm a strong advocate of change in Iran. But to assume that you are actually going to change by violence, it's not going to happen. Only Zionists like yourself, Goldie, and a Jewish person will actually advocate and push for that.
You don't.
Oh, and there we go. There we go. He brought out the Z word. Oh my gosh. You know what, Johnny? It's so easy to like trap them in that narrative, right? Um, Omar, literally no one is calling for violence. The only people calling for violence are the bloodthirsty Islamic regime in Iran who go out there and they murder Iranians every single day. They've been executing on average 6 Iranians every day. There's many other Iranians who basically commit suicide because of the Islamic regime. And they're the ones who are posing an existential threat to Iranians and across the Middle East. Um, and you know something? I am a Zionist. I do believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist. In fact, the vast majority of Jewish people are Zionists, and I would say the vast majority of Iranians are also Zionists because we recognize that Israel has the right to exist. The history of Iranians and Israelis goes back 3,000 years to the time of Cyrus the Great. Calling me a Zionist is not an insult. In fact, it's a compliment. It's a compliment because that means I'm not a genocidal, mouth-breathing Neanderthal. The land belongs to Israel. It belongs to the Jewish people. It's their ancestral homeland. So, take that Zionist BS narrative somewhere else. It's not welcome here. It's not wanted here. I don't know, Johnny, if you want to add anything
Zayo,
to that, but I think the fact
you should go in Solomon's space. And in terms of the people you hang around with, Iranians that you say you hang around with, they're probably from the Islamic Republic that you're hanging around with. So they're not anything that we would class as Iranian at all. You know what we class them? We class them traitors, right? That's what we class them.
or Vatan Furush.
I think that says it all. People can judge for themselves in terms of how that interaction went. And that's the reality. Some people, they come up and they peddle that kind of stuff, but as they talk, they kind of give the game away in terms of what their true intentionality is. And it goes on from there, folks. We'll play two last clips on the space. And this one, you're going to find quite amusing in some instances. We're going to play a clip of somebody who has an IQ of 165. 165. And he's called Azadi. Well, his virtual name is. So we're going to play that right now, and you can make your own mind up of what that IQ means.
So the topic is revolution, and the thing with the 1979 revolution, and I'm anti-79 revolution. I'm an anti-revolutionary in that sense, but and I think of it as a temporary occupation. I think we're just on an extended vacation. In 79, in the 70s, because of, I mean, if you look at the contracts and the timelines and price of oil and whatnot, certain commodities were going up. Oil was the number one that's the most evidence for, and therefore the MI6 decided to remove the Shah, and they asked the American MI6 CIA to get rid of him, which he did. And sometime in the middle of the 80s, there was a law passed in the U.S. Congress prohibiting any involvement by the CIA and only the CIA in replacing the government of Iran and only Iran. So it's very specific in that 80s law, and it's just, I don't see it happening. We don't have the military support. We don't have the hardware to do a revolution, at least a hard revolution in Iran. So if we do have one, we have to have a soft one. There are ways of doing it. I've given instructions over and over with methods that would work. I literally have an IQ of 165, and by comparison, Einstein had an IQ of 125. It's the highest I've scored on an IQ test. I speak 3 languages fluently. I'm a very intelligent guy, and I study this shit all the time. Pardon my language, but I'm a political nerd. I listen. I watch this. But a revolution, I don't see it happening. And His Majesty Reza Pahlavi II wasn't even on board with that until Masa Amini happened, and we saw that was the only solution, at least for now. But I think over time we're going to be able to wither away, or at least chip away at the Islamic regime. Slowly over time, maybe in the next 10 years or so, we'll be able to
How do you figure that out?
Well,
because
the United States is run by institutions and Iran is run by institutions. So if we get rid of these institutions or we weaken them, then possibly we can have a change. But there's no concrete plan. There's no organized movement. I mean, His Majesty is the leader of the people already. A lot of us don't feel.
I might not have an IQ of 165 and speak 3 languages as you do, but I can smell bullshit a mile off.
Oh, wow.
And in
I
terms
don't
of
need
what
to be
you're saying,
disrespected.
because
If
I don't buy it.
You disagree with me, Johnny.
I don't buy it.
You disagree with me, that's
off.
fine.
I don't buy it a mile off because your narrative, and you have to go with your instincts, folks, and not always you're correct, but my instinct
That's
says
fair,
to
but you don't
me,
have to disrespect me.
my
Say I'm
instinct
saying
says to
bullshit.
me, my instinct says to me that what you claim to be and what you are is completely two different things. I don't buy it.
Huh?
I think you're you're putting a narrative
What is it
here.
that I claim to be, Johnny?
You're claiming that you're pro kind of Pahlavi and that you're pro Iran, etc. But you're putting out there a
Honestly,
lot of
I
statements.
have I have friends in the Pahlavi family.
Yes, yeah, of course. It's like it's like in UAE, everybody knows the sheikh, or does business with the sheikh. I don't buy it. I think a lot of what you're saying is disingenuous. I think you're putting a lot of comments out there in terms of, oh, it's not going to happen. It's going to take such a long time. I think you're getting ahead of yourself. There's no plan. There's no that. You're no Pahlavi supporter. You're not pro-Iran. You're pro-Islamic Republic, right? And that's from someone who doesn't have an IQ of 165 and speaks three languages. But what I do speak is the language of knowing when someone's a bullshitter, and my bullshit detector is going off a mile.
And that's the thing, folks. You get different flavors, different types of individuals. And at first, Goldie, when I was hearing him, you listen to him and you think he's an eloquent guy. He's articulate, he's eloquent.
He has an IQ of 165.
165. Einstein only had one of 125. And then he makes some points about the oil market in terms of going up, and that was true in terms of the 70s. The Shah was the head of OPEC, and he was making Iran the Japan of the Middle East, wanted to be the top 5 most prosperous countries in a 25-year plan. And he was making the argument, we're buying all these commodities, we want a fair price in terms of the oil for our commodity. And then the red flags come up, and in terms of what he was really about. Because when he was talking about 10 years, when he was 10 years or so, this is the thing. There are people out there that are eloquent, articulate, Nayaki type almost, which is one of the prominent groups of the Islamic Republic. That
the reformists.
They sound great, they sound educated, whatever. And people who are not political anorexics, who don't know much about it, think, oh, actually, that sounds really plausible and sensible. But you have to unlayer that like you do with an onion, peel by peel, and you get to the heart of it. Because as King Reza Pahlavi said, it is now or never. And it is. These 12 months are crucial for Iran because it's the perfect storm. What happened with the Islamic Republic? The economy is sinking, it's hyperinflation, poverty rates are sky high, there's mass hate in terms of Iranians towards the regime, etc. They want them just gone. You've got the war between Israel and Hamas. You've got the proxy Hezbollah on its knees. Hamas is on its knees. You've got all the tit for tat that's happened between Israel and the Islamic Republic in terms of the last attack, which the Islamic Republic haven't done anything about. You've then got the election of Trump, who brought the maximum pressure campaign. Remember, on Trump's watch, Soleimani got assassinated, etc., as well in that time. And you've got Bibi. And you've got Russia that are plugged in to in a war with Ukraine, where the Russian bears become a koala. So this perfect storm is all coming up. So it is now or never. Don't you agree?
100%, Johnny. Now that I'm listening to it again myself, there's 3 major red flags that I picked up on. The first one was when he tried to downplay the brutality of the Islamic regime by calling it an extended vacation.
I think of it as a temporary occupation. I think we're just on an extended vacation.
That did not sit right with me. And that really plays into the reformist narrative. Anyone who compares the Islamic regime to an extended vacation is purposely trying to downplay the brutality of the Islamic regime. It is not an extended vacation to live inside of Iran right now. It is a death sentence. You are walking around. You could be arbitrarily executed at any day, at any time, and for any reason whatsoever. There are so many people who have lost their lives at the hands of this Islamic regime. You have Mahsa Amini, you have Khoda Nur Lajari, you have Nika Shakarami, you have Kian Pir Falak. More recently, you have Kianush. So to refer to that as an extended vacation is not just disrespectful, but it is a red flag. And that should let people know, okay, reformist narrative. The reformers are here. They're trying to downplay the viciousness and the brutality of the Islamic regime. So that's the first one. The second red flag for me, Johnny, is when he essentially insulted King Reza Pahlavi by saying that even King Reza Pahlavi wasn't calling for revolution until Mahsa Amini was brutally murdered.
And His Majesty Reza Pahlavi II wasn't even on board with that until Mahsa Amini happened.
When that's not the case at all. King Reza Pahlavi has been advocating for a free Iran for 46 years. So for him to say that bold-faced lie, try to kind of slip it in very casually, I'm like, And then at that point, I'm thinking, okay, so strike one is referring to it as an extended vacation, but it also kind of like you have some doubts in your mind because you're like, okay, maybe he's like, just not as knowledgeable. Maybe he doesn't understand. Maybe he's never been to Iran. He doesn't know how bad it is. And then strike two, where he goes after King Reza Pahlavi, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe he's not as familiar with King Reza Pahlavi. Maybe he's still learning or something, right? But again, and I mentioned this in the space, what sealed the deal is when he goes, yeah, we'll slowly chip away at it in the next 10 years or so. We'll chip away.
I think over time we're going to be able to wither away, or at least chip away at the Islamic regime slowly over time, maybe in the next 10 years or so.
That, for me, was like, all right, strike three, you're out. Especially since we had shared King Reza Pahlavi's speech in our space. It was pinned up in the nest and in English. The English version was there for everyone to read. And if you had bothered to read what King Reza Pahlavi wrote just a few days ago, he basically said,
now is the time to decide. Let us move forwards towards a bright and free, prosperous and flourishing future. Long live Iran.
When you clearly have King Reza Pahlavi saying, now is the time. It is now or never. Now is the time to move forward. Now is the time to unite and to overthrow the regime. For someone like that to come in and promote the direct opposite of what King Reza Pahlavi is saying, red flag, to me, he's with the Islamic regime. Your BS detector, Johnny, is par none. It's right up there.
Well, as you grow older, that BS detector gets stronger. But that was beautifully put, and you broke it down really, really well. And I want to move on to the final bit of the space where we actually hear from an Iranian lady who lived for a considerable time in Iran in telling you exactly what it was like and how it was from someone who's Iranian and lived in Iran for a considerable period of time.
I just want to emphasize that we went through a lot of things. Now we came out with more knowledge and we are much wiser. And I see wonderfully you do a great job to recognizing who is not the real voice for Iran. Now we have Reza Pahlavi, future King Reza Pahlavi, or however you want to call him. And he is, we have to look up to him as a true north, star, because it's so difficult these days to really find who is enemy and who is pretending to be a friend. So this is a great time for all of us. Just unite and just look up to that bright star, because we know him. I am 3 years older than him, and I grew up with Pahlavis, and unfortunately We were all very young and we were brainwashed. We caught the disease. Like, if you were not communist or leftist or Marxist, you were not fashionable, you were not intelligent enough. We had everything we needed. We had a house, we had a single family house, we always had a car, we had gathering, we were just a normal family that we had everything. And the people that they were in trouble, they were in prison, they were taking arms, or they were fighting literally with arms. And I went to visit after the prisons opened that day. I was in Tehran, and we were going to visit um, the people they came out of prison in the hospitals. And I never forget that I met one young Iranian that he was 19 and he couldn't walk. And when we asked him, what did you do? He literally had arm, and they were fighting against the police, and he was shot during that time. So that was the time, and we had everything we needed. We had enough freedom to express ourselves as much as you can say. um, I don't want to compare it to France or America, but we literally were free. We never felt kind of a suppressed. The only freedom that people were seeking, it was to become Marxist, Leninist, or to become jihadist. Those kind of a freedom we did not have. And actually, this 40 years of experience should show us exactly why we should not have those freedoms. Unfortunately, uh, the propaganda from Russia was too strong and overcame the young people and all the intellectuals, the poet, the writers, and also so on. But we grew up in that atmosphere, in that time, and we know Reza Pahlavi's mother. We have one of the best human being alive as Iranian woman. I cannot say enough for what she did that in Iran. I have a communist kind of a background, cousin, super smart, super intellectual, that he wanted to do a research about the architect in Iran. And then he said, oh, I'm going to put one small chapter for Farah Pahlavi because she was so involved. Then he started to do his research, that ex-communist. He had to write the whole book. His book is going to come out eventually, very soon, because he's very picky and he's working on it. And he said what she did in Iran for the art and architecture was so much that he cannot just put it in one chapter. So based on at least that, I really hope everything happens while she's alive. And knowing who is his mother, it has to give us more strength and more ideas that to know what we have to do, what actually we have to look up to. So I really hope that we just all together and just look like a star of the north, and just not left, not right. Yes, a lot of people do a lot of good things, and I'm not, a lot of people, and they should. But as to find your compass, that we are not going anymore to get vacillate from things, and just look to one person and follow that.
That speaks volumes. In amongst all of the noise, and there is a lot of noise, and there is a lot of narratives, and there is a lot of labels, really wrong labels that have been attached to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. There is someone who actually lived there, was actually there. And a lot of labels come from outside to within. So that was quite powerful, I thought.
It's very telling that she's speaking about how in the late 70s it was the fashionable thing to be communist or on the left. We're seeing history repeat itself with the ignorant. Now, of course, Iranians, we have learned our lesson as a nation. And I think that's why the only group that's hated more than Islamists is communists. by Iranians because of that unholy alliance that ruined Iran. So I think Iranians as a nation have learned their lesson. But we're seeing that right now in the left right now, where you have the very, very woke, radical, progressives who think communism is fashionable, right? And so we're seeing that replay itself, and they're the ones who are aligning with the Islamists and the jihadists in the West. But going back to what Sohaila was saying, it's so important what she said about viewing King Reza Pahlavi as the North Star and focusing on him. And that's critical because we've seen just in the past week 2 sort of fake news stories come out, right? One about Khamenei being in a coma, one about whether or not Elon Musk met with the UN official for the Islamic regime, because these are ways for the Islamic regime to try and divert people's attention away from King Reza Pahlavi and towards something else. And even in our space, with all of these random people coming in, not only trying to change the narrative, but trying to promote false information as well. Right now, we're at such a critical point, Johnny, and I'll end it here with my final thoughts. We're at such a critical point right now as an Iranian nation because for 45 years, the narrative has come from the Islamic regime. The narrative has come from their propaganda outlets because the Islamic regime has spent billions of dollars on promoting their narrative, whether it's the reformist narrative through NIAC and Farnas Fasihi and their pro-Islamic regime lobby group in the West, whether it's the narrative through their foreign affairs ministers, their own sort of media outlets that they've funded, whether it's Press TV or Quds News Network or whatever the case, whatever other garbage they put out there, they've had this narrative. And they have been very successful at promoting this narrative because social media did not exist. But now, with social media, and especially with X, Iranians have been able to go beyond that narrative. King Reza Pahlavi has been able to go beyond that narrative and show that, yes, there is an alternative. Iranians do have a leader. And with the hashtag King Reza Pahlavi, he now has the authority to go out there, and no one can question the authority anymore. No one can question his legitimacy because there's no one else out there.
Before we wrap up our conversation, do you have any messages for our audience?
Well, I think when we believe that a lot of what inspires people around the world to have compassion, to care, to understand what suffering happens when there's injustice, when there is repression, it behooves any human being to take action, not to be silent. How they choose to do it, by action, by prayer, by help. There are so many ways. But it's the idea of feeling connected. And what I would like to say is that, I say in my talk to my fellow citizens, I want to move the needle from hope to belief. That we should go beyond hoping for a better world, but believe that we can actually get it done. And the quickest way, I think, that you can make the Iranian people know that although they should not count on anything other than their own resolve, but how easier it would be for them if they knew they have a lot of compassion and support from the rest of the world. And that, I hope, is a message that our viewers can convey to Iranians, that they are not alone in this and that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Remember, Johnny, in the beginning, we would host spaces and people would come in and say, oh, yes, I want the Islamic regime to go and, I want to overthrow it and, we need a leader, but, oh, it's not Reza Pahlavi. No, not him. And then you would always ask, well, who else?
Yeah, and they would be like, and that they wouldn't have an answer. That's the reality.
No, because there's no one else.
No, and they would just hide behind, well, there are plenty of capable people. Yeah, well, who? There are. Iranians are tremendously capable. The biggest resource in Iran is this human resource, but there is no one else. Really important points that you said, and powerful points. And it's crucial times, it's important times, and that's why we dedicated a long time on this. Obviously, both of us having Iranian origins, etc., as well, makes it even more important in terms of it having kind of that dear to your heart factor. But we're also now going to be speaking about numerous topics, as we have done, because this podcast, this channel, it's about tackling the hard subjects, speaking the hard truths, raw, real, unfiltered, weekly analysis, talking about these things, Goldie and I's unique takes, embracing our spaces as we do. And I hope you're enjoying that, hearing these voices that people come up, real life people. This is the new version of radio, folks, etc., that you're seeing here and now.
Talk radio.
Talk radio. And next week's episode is going to be a good one, so definitely tune into that. And that is, has Saudi double-crossed Israel, and what has happened to MBS? So you definitely want to tune in to that one. So until then, this has been Johnny from London.
And Goldie from Toronto.
Till next time, folks. Catch you on the next one.